work and conversation till now. Oh, thank you. Also a reminder, we are recording this meeting as we have the previous meetings. Thanks, Julia. All right, let's do it. Let's jump into our small group. So I'll give some instructions. There will also be someone in each of your groups who can make sure that you know what to do and keep time. So we're going to get into groups. We're going to do a rotation for each. There'll be 4 rotations, each focused on a piece of the report. In those rotations, you're going to read the section of the report, reflect independently, and then we'll have a Jamboard where you can use sticky notes to jot down your reflections. Then you'll have some time to discuss in a small group. We're also going to ask that you name one person in your group who is the captain to share out to the whole group after we wrap each section. So we're going to do this 4 times. Independent review, small group, jot your notes on the Jamboard, small group discussion, and then share out to the whole group. The notes will also, these directions will also be in your small group, so you don't have to memorize them. So our first rotation is going to be pages 7 to 22 of the report. That's a bigger chunk of the report, but a lot of it is background information, like what did the work group do? So we'll have about 15 minutes total, and including our whole group discussion. So I think, Julia, you are going to go ahead and put us into groups, right?
Yes, I'll open the groups now, and all you need to do is just click join.
Thanks, Julia.
Tracy just messaged that she lost power, so she is in transit right now.
Okay.
Sarah, I'm riding. If I lose the signal, I'll have to keep back in if I miss you. So hang in there. But not driving.
Okay, I'm glad you're not driving, Michael.
Hi, Dr. Coons. We are in breakout rooms right now. If you would like to join one, otherwise we will start coming back in a little less than 15 minutes.
Great. That is the best news ever. I get to do personal needs for a minute that I haven't gotten to do. So thank you.
Perfect. I'll let you know. I'll warn you when we're starting to come back.
Hey, Julia.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi. So I think then I'll just have to miss the first set of breakouts, and I'm gonna hang up and just log in as soon as I get to my second location.
Okay, no problem. I'll look out for your name to let you back in.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
I'd like to make a formal apology to my group because I talked too much.
Oh, good.
I was just gonna say, as the person responsible for timing, I clearly failed because my group also ran out of time. But what I did here and the notes that everyone added on the Jamboard were really helpful. So we have time to sort of discuss takeaways as a whole group, and we were going to ask this one person from each group just share one or two things that came out from the small group about what resonated most, and then other edits that they would suggest. With full acknowledgement that my group ran out of time, Alan, can I cold call on you to share out briefly?
No, there's some good stuff on the Jamboard. I do think we highlight the importance, the importance of really maintaining our emphasis on accessibility for all students, and obviously recognizing that there are some good things happening in other states. We lifted up how the executive summary is probably all we're going to get a lot of policymakers to really read, if we're honest. So a lot of focus after we get through the whole report, we got to kind of come back to the executive summary and make sure, as Jill said, the executive summary should be able to stand on its own. So we want to just make sure that's the truth. And in terms of suggestions, there is the on page 5, we have a recommendation plan for future innovation. That right now is just a little too vague for casual readers. I think we're probably thinking about how we want to future-proof the process a little bit, but I just think planning for future innovation is kind of like what casual readers want to know what that means.
I will move to the next group, and then obviously we'll have plenty of time for everyone to just also add other things, acknowledging that our group didn't fully wrap. So Katie, is there someone from your group who is going to share out?
I'm happy to do that unless Chris or Wendy, did you?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, our group talked about the importance of the standards work that is going on, and that really need to focus on making changes to the standards of learning to really then see changes in the assessment items. And both of them also felt that it was really well written and didn't have any edits. So that was the focus of our conversation.
Yeah, and could I add, building on what the last group said, and knowing and loving my former brethren and sistren in the General Assembly, if all they read was that first paragraph in the executive summary, they would at least get the basic sense of what the report talks about. And I think that's very good.
Great, thank you. Jamie, I don't know if there's someone from your group.
I will call on either Jamie or Matt to share out if possible.
I'll defer to Matt.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Jamie got talked out at the last little piece there. Basically, we had a few concerns there. First of all, if the NAEP is the gold standard and that's what we're shooting for, it's one thing to set our cut scores to align to it. But if our standards don't align to it, that's a different story. So, for example, if you look at the 4th grade NAEP sample assessment items, there are some things assessed that are not to be taught in Virginia until 5th or 6th grade. So we definitely need to make sure that our standards are aligned to what that would be, as well as the cut scores. The other thing was that we discussed that we're not so sure that writing should be included on all tests, but certainly include it where it's appropriate. Writing could serve as a barrier to some kids. And when you get into evaluating writing, there's a lot more subjectivity that goes into that as well. And for math, for example, I can see some benefit to have kids writing their responses out and their thinking, but there's also plenty of technology out there that's available that can show us the kids thinking through the manipulation of that problem. So I don't know that that's necessary for all tests. Jamie, was there anything else that I left out there?
Sorry, I was trying to get my mouse to work. No, I agree with everything Matt just said. And I put on our Jamboard the accessibility for all students, that being the goal, was really, a positive, I think, coming out of the group. Now, what that actually looks like in implementation, I'm interested in how it'll actually flesh out. And I think, like, I expressed concerns about the report is great, but it's kind of really vague, and it's going to depend on who's the recipient of that work as to far as what it looks like in implementation, and does the implementation match what our recommendations were. That'll be, I just think somebody's going to facilitate that really well to make sure that those match. And then I always come back to this, but I put this on here about how on page 10 in the report, it talks about nothing precludes this group from looking at other assessment forms. And I think that, one of the things that we didn't spend a whole lot of time on was looking at alternate forms of, we looked at different ways to make our current test, but looking at how could we integrate performance tasks into our balanced assessment system that are backwards planned to design whatever durable skills are articulated in our profile of a graduate, so that those things are being as valued, because that's what business and industry is saying is needed, than what we currently have. And then I also just highlighted the fact that I liked the reading assessments grounded in standards based on things the kids should have learned in their social studies and science classes or other classes on that grade level, because that eliminates lots of gaps, like the opportunity gap. It also eliminates these random passages on the evolution of the toothbrush and whatever else, so that it has meaning. And lastly, as far as the reading assessments, I really feel like part of the science of reading, and this is just what I'm personally seeing, is we're teaching people how to be callers without building their background knowledge to where they can then comprehend and apply at the next level. So we really that would actually help with that too, because we'd be teaching some content at the lower levels as well.
Thanks, Jamie. Our last group, Shelley or Sarah, I don't know if there's someone from your group who wants to share out.
Yeah, I think Christy was going to.
Yes.
All right. Good morning. I think for us, I mean, we all understand the importance of the work. We support the importance of work because it is important for us to provide quality assessments for our students. One of the things that we would suggest as an edit, when you look at page 12, and it was a statement regarding lowering the standards, where when the SOLs were implemented in the 1990s, Virginia was held in high regard. And when you look at that, and we were all discussing kind of where we were at that time when it was implemented, and then you look to now, and I guess I wonder if we could look at it from a standpoint of not necessarily someone lowering the standard, but maybe we didn't adjust in the way that or shift in the way that we should have during that time frame. But I guess I want us to look at it when you start lowering, it looks like more of an intentional act of, hey, we're going to lower the standards, we're going to reduce the rigor and assessments, versus looking at it from a standpoint of maybe those adjustments weren't made. Because I would hate decades from now, I'll be retired, but decades from now, or a decade or so, and someone looks at the meaningful work everybody's doing with this group, and to consider it, if it doesn't meet that standard at that particular time, I wouldn't want it looked at as this work we were there saying that we lowered standards for students, or we didn't adjust in the way that was necessary. And so I just wanted to put that piece out there. If as someone who, if you're reading it, not necessarily lowering the standards, but maybe we didn't adjust in the way that we need to, or we didn't shift or move as fast. So that was one of the things that we felt confident that it would be helpful as an edit.
Yeah, Chrissy, to clarify, both are true. So I think the language here needs to be more precise. The board lowered the cut scores. So this is using the word standards to refer to performance achievement level cut scores, which is confusing in a report that also talks about standards, meaning academic standards. So I agree with that message. It's how do you keep up when you can't stay where you are? You've got to keep evolving over time. I think we have a minute or so left, and would welcome additional thoughts or feedback that we didn't come up or you didn't hear anyone else share. I should have mentioned at the top also, we'll send out an exit ticket as we always do. So if there's feedback that you didn't get a chance, like, oh, I heard someone say that, I didn't put it on the Jamboard, and like I didn't get a chance to share it in the chat, you will have, we welcome feedback that way as well, and want to make sure that the report that gets put out reflects all the feedback that we are hearing from you all. Great, Julie, if you could go back to the slide that shows all of the sections again. So we're gonna shift now. That was like the longest number of pages that you were gonna review at one time. So this rotation will focus just on opportunity 3, which is about reporting. It's pages 23 to 27. So Julia will stick us back into our small groups, and then you'll have some time for independent reading and adding notes.
Dr. Coons, I'm about to close the breakout rooms. Just a heads up.
Also, Allie, I realized I didn't introduce you to our small group. So while we're waiting for others to come back, I should have noted that Allie is on Secretary Quidera's team and is listening in today. All right, welcome back. I hope everyone had fruitful conversations. I take the feedback that it was much easier to read like 3 or 4 pages than the pages of the first session. So I hope that left more time for thinking and discussion this time. Why don't we mix up the order, and I will start with group 2, which is Katie's group. If y'all could share 1 or 2 things that stood out to you from this section of the report.
And Wendy will be sharing for us.
Yes, I am happy to do so. We kind of all said that we didn't feel like this particular section was quite as strong as the previous ones in the way it was written. One of the things that I feel or I noticed about this is we are very, very articulate in saying that reporting needs to be based on what the stakeholders' needs are, and that we need to make sure we're providing, the clear and actual reporting for each of those populations. What I feel it is lacking is we aren't providing enough recommendation or guidance as to what does that look like. And I think if I had to pick an area that this work group probably could have used more time on is looking at the reporting piece. And I know Virginia reports, but outside of that, I don't even really know what is available out there. What are the possibilities that we could do to report? And what is the most significant data pieces that we need to share with parents, with students, with teachers? But I do feel like we need to provide more opportunity to learn more about the reporting piece for each of the specific stakeholders. And as we had talked in our group, we all kind of agreed in that same type of lacking in this particular section.
We thought sort of an HB585 round 2, which we couldn't do. They'd have to do something else, but that idea.
Well, for sure, we have 1 example report in the appendix, and I think we could pull others as well. And I think I saw a note about DC, which is a great idea. They've been a real leader in this space.
Hey, Jill, the legislature also asked us to launch a parent portal task force, and it's one of the key things that they are working on. But if there are recommendations for this group that you want us to send over to that group, because that's a parallel group to this group, we are happy to cross-function and share those together. Also would love any things that you recommend for our new parent engagement office, because they are digging in and working on this quite a bit. So would love that back to us as well.
Jamie's group, who wants to share out?
I said I would, since I threw Matt under the bus the first time. So one of our concerns is, and it was on page 27, it says eliminating unnecessary retesting. Matt and I really were having a hard time, and Matt, don't let me speak for you, but when is that ever the case, right? The conversation that we both recalled more often was the unnecessary through growth testing where we've tried to repurpose assessments to determine growth instead of using an assessment that is designed to measure growth. We were just trying to figure out, because we don't want to eliminate expedited retakes. Because, and I gave examples where I was a middle school principal where a kid would get 375 one day, the next day he got a 600. And it all comes down to what was going on in the kid's life that day. And then also we agreed that the assessment results should be timely and differentiated, and most importantly, easily interpreted into actionable instructional supports for teachers to be able to work with a kid. And then we, in here somewhere it said releasing sample test items. We were all about that, but even better, and Matt brought this up, released test items, like test items that had actually been on a previous test, is important for our teachers so that they build confidence, they build an understanding of what's going to be assessed, and we move forward. And that was pretty much what we talked about in this part, and then I went off topic.
I can't believe that, Jamie. All right, group 4, which is Shelley and Sarah's group, and then we'll circle back around to group 1.
Okay, that would be me. We spent a little time talking about how this section doesn't have timelines, like by when should all this work be done, and who makes up that timeline, and should it be specified usually by a certain time. That timeline we didn't have, but just wondering if there needs to be some more work there.
Yep, and there is a timeline section towards the end, Tracy, that connects all this. You should react to this. My thought when you said timelines is the new reporting will need to be associated with new tests. So the timeline is the timeline of the new assessments. And there are probably things I think that could be done to improve reporting on the current assessments. And I hadn't fully contemplated that until you pushed on the timeline. So it's worth thinking about what that means. All right, last but not least, I'm looking for Rebecca.
All right, so we kind of had the pros of liking the actionable items from the report that's kind of tailored towards parents, but also teachers as well, so that they can use them throughout the year. We like the fact that it mentions the interim assessments with a pacing guide, because if the state is putting out interim assessments that are the same across the state, then teachers really do have to be teaching it in the same order. And then some areas that we thought maybe could be edited, just the accessibility to teachers of just really driving home that not everybody has access to those reports. So hopefully that would help, but not just for their current year students, but maybe the ones that they get the next year, can they still get access to those reports from the get-go so that it can help drive instruction the next year. And then formalizing performance tasks and a scoring process so that it will match with the profile of a Virginia graduate. And let me see, deepening and extending assessment literacy among Virginia's educators for a balanced assessment system.
We have a few minutes before we move to the next rotation. If anyone wants to add or elaborate on anything else that was said. Alan, I see your note in the chat, and it connects, I think, to one of the comments Rebecca just made, which is it's hard to disconnect some of the challenges of an end of year assessment with making the reporting actionable. Meaning in a world where you have a coherent assessment system, which is what the next section is going to be about, that in and of itself makes the results from the test more actionable. Jamie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and I don't mean to go back to the first conversation, but I did have a couple questions. So, and I may have missed this when the lady from NAEP was presenting, so if so, I apologize. But we're talking about lowering the standards, which meant the board had lowered the cut scores too much or whatever. My question is, when the lady who was sitting beside me from Minnesota, who was the special ed expert, when somebody had mentioned that in the group, she said, well, that's pretty standard for how it's done across the country as far as how cut scores are set. So what is going to be the process for how we set cut scores? And then I wanted to know, how does NAEP set their cut scores? And I'm not familiar with the NAEP test other than that our middle school had it last year and again this year. But do they change the NAEP assessment? And if they do change the NAEP assessment, what's their process for adjusting the cut scores? Because I would be interested in to just say how we can't have the board just arbitrarily set cut scores. There's got to be a process, and what is that process?
Yeah, does someone from the Virginia team want to share what the cut score process looks like? I think it's really helpful just hear you guys voice over.
I think having Katie describe what the Virginia process is and what it is in several other states, and she's worked with multiple states on cut scores, and she's a new member of the Virginia team and will be helping us moving forward, would be awesome.
I also, gosh, I did not introduce Katie at the beginning of this meeting, which is, I was like, oh, everyone's met everyone. So Katie is the new deputy who is leading all.
Oh no, I get to.
You're
Katie
great. You
is
do
a
it.
member of my cabinet. She is the last member of my cabinet. I'm so excited to have her. She is the deputy of performance and support. So she manages all of the assessment accountability, but also the Office of School Quality and Educator Prep, and really connects the work between assessment and accountability to supporting our schools who need the most work. And I'm excited to have those two bound together. But Katie comes from a national background, both on accountability and on assessment design. So we're really excited to have her and her depth and breadth, particularly Jamie, for questions like this.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question from the national perspective, but then for the Virginia perspective, I'm still learning. So I'll turn it over to Shelley to give a high level overview of that. But most states do a standard setting process every time that they develop a new assessment. They don't do it annually. They might in a couple years do a recheck and bring together a standard setting team to look through items and then either validate the cut scores that were already set or make adjustments. But normally what most states do, in the states that I have worked with, they identify educators and bring those educators in to review items and then make decisions based off the review of those items and understanding how students should be performing on those items to set the cut scores based off their knowledge of instruction and student knowledge and so forth. NAEP, I am not sure actually how they go about their standard setting. That's one that's probably a little bit more complex. But states do every now and then again check and validate those scores. But Shelley, I would love for you to say if there's anything more about how Virginia goes about this. Oh, and the other thing I will mention too is that some states do a policy review as well, because educators have one perspective, but cut scores are also a policy decision. So there are some states that have a second round of review where they bring in maybe legislators, they bring in district leaders or divisional leaders. They bring in people from the state board and so forth to look at the cut scores that educators had set to make sure that it tracks with the policy decisions at the state level. But most states do just use a group of educators to really make those decisions. Shelley, anything you would add from a Virginia perspective?
So Virginia's process is very similar. One change we have made recently in the most recent standard setting was to include parents, and Michael was actually one of the parents who sat on the committee. In addition, we involved committee members from higher education. So while most of the committee members who reviewed the test items and made recommendations were K-12 educators, we did have some parents and also some higher ed faculty to be involved. At this point, Virginia has not used the policy committee that Katie talked about, but that is something that has been discussed in the last few months.
And the one thing, just to add to what Shelley has said about NAEP as well, is that I think NAEP's very different because it's a long-term trend assessment. A lot of states, when they move to a new assessment, they make the decision to not continue long-term trends. So they go through a brand new standard setting process. So NAEP, that's why it's probably a little bit more complicated, is that they're trying to make sure that we can continue to have their information to be able to look at long-term trends.
And I think what just came out is exactly what I was trying to get at. Throw NAEP out of the conversation because that's not really what I was talking about. Basically, we are using a process very similar to the rest of the country, correct? And if that's the case, why did the cut scores end up where they are, and how will we modify that process to ensure that we are more aligned to the rigor? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would say, Lisa, you came off mute. Did you want to?
I would say it's a lot of the conversation you've been having, Jamie. It's not just cut scores, right? It is standards, it's assessment design, because you can have really low standards and a really easy assessment and have your cut scores way up here, but it's not actually going to align across the board. And that's actually, NAEP is like this independent, isolated piece that measures the health of all these things. So I don't think it's just the cut scores and what people are doing with cut scores. And you guys have been so proud of the conversations and have talked a lot with my other colleagues in other states. You guys are talking about standards, you're talking about assessment, and you're talking about cut scores. Because if you just monkey with one piece of that, you're not actually improving the system. So I'm really proud of just the conversations and being involved, because you're talking about all the pieces in the system, and you guys run schools and do things. You know what happens when you just talk about a part of that. It doesn't fix it. But the idea that you guys are working all together actually takes that dipstick and NAEP and says NAEP as a comparison is the health of our system healthy, and talking about things. So I think the awesomeness about this conversation, sorry for words, I've had way too many conversations and talking opportunities this week, but is that you are thinking about all the layers and thinking about all the layers together. And this even, we've talked about this at the board with the board members, having this layer with the accountability layer allows the whole system to be healthy together. And it's not taking the pieces and parsing out the pieces.
And that goes back to that one line I'm talking about where somebody made mention of the standards, and it wasn't that, it was the cut scores. It's not, it's the culmination of all the things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is why that recommendation is so key, right? This group is
right. I just don't want it to look like that our Board of Education just arbitrarily made really low cut scores, and that was the cause for all of it.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, lots going on there. All right, that's such a helpful question, Jamie, and thank you, Katie, for jumping in and providing that context, and Shelley as well. Let's shift. We've got opportunity. Actually, if you could pull back up, Julia, the slide. Yep, thank you. So we're going to do opportunity 4 and 5. This is about coherence, and then this is where we are capturing room for innovation and new ways of doing things in the future. Another shorter section, hopefully. So we will split into our groups and have about 8 minutes to read quietly and then add your notes. All right, welcome back. I will continue to recircle my rotation. So we'll start with group 3 this time, which is Jamie, your group.
Yes, that would be me. So there was a couple things that we discussed. First of all, everybody was ecstatic about the recommendation for minimized testing time. You know, we're spending so much time weighing our hogs that we don't have enough time to feed them these days. So, you know, that doesn't work too well for us. So that's a good thing. There was a lot of concern about the SGAs and how that those have not delivered what they have promised to deliver. You know, everybody kind of looks at those as a waste of time. In fact, a lot of principals tell me, why are we giving those tests this fall? We just gave the kids the SOL test in the spring. We've got all that data in the bank. There's no need to burn another day given that test.
Yep.
So, you know, the recommendation would be just to simply eliminate those things to the General Assembly. You know, they're not necessary, and we could probably use that money better in other ways. And then the other thing that we talked about was making sure that everything that we're doing is aligned to that profile of a graduate. You know, of course, that starts with the standards, but it also has to come in play with the assessments. You know, are we doing things so that those durable skills that we want kids to graduate with, that they can go off into the world, or they can go off into college or into the economy and do great things and pay lots of taxes so I get Social Security one of these days. You know, those are the types of things that we want to make sure that this does as well. And I don't know that our recommendations might be strong enough to that end.
Can I echo on Matt real quick that we're not saying we want to eliminate giving kids the opportunity to demonstrate growth. He actually has on his post-it that VIVAS provides a valid and reliable growth tool that is even more reliable than what we're currently doing. So we're not saying eliminate growth, we're saying eliminate those assessments. Sorry, Matt.
And the VIVAS does it without additional testing. It can use the test that we already administer.
Yep. I don't know if everyone in this group knows what VIVAS is, so just one of you want to give a quick description.
Sure, it's a program that was put together by SAS out of North Carolina, and several states use it, and several states actually use it for accountability. But basically what it does is it compares a student's progress from one year to the next, and it provides a projected outcome for the kid based on their previous testing history. And they can go back and even use PALs and all kinds of things earlier. So we could get some statistics on kids even as early as third grade. So it is pretty neat, and they're doing a lot more training with it. In fact, they've got a big university going on next week with that. So the Board of Education heard about that last week, and Alan, I don't know what your all's thoughts were, but it seemed like everybody was pretty excited about that.
That would take a chunk of time, but I'll just come back to this. I just want to make sure we don't create recommendations that conflict with other recommendations, because we are in this group recommending that we have really solid measures of student growth. And those would be authentic individual measures of student growth for every individual child. So yeah, when I was with Salem, we were the first district in Virginia to contract with SAS. So I hold their assessment, their process in very, very high regard. However, I do think we need, as we've said in other recommendations, really good measure of student growth. So I think we need to be careful here as we're talking about the current Virginia through-year growth assessment, that just because it is not doing what it's purported to do doesn't mean that through-year growth assessments can't be a very good idea. It just means that the one we currently have isn't functioning as expected. And that's where the frustration is. And that's where the time, as you pointed out, everybody here, Roxy Public Schools, is like, oh my gosh, do we really need to do the mass uploads and lock down browsers and pull all the IT staff in and bring in the hall proctors for this? And that's overkill.
Even so, if the data coming from it was more meaningful, I don't even think folks would mind doing all that. So I agree, Alan, I agree.
Shelley and Sarah's group.
I can volunteer. We talked about a couple things. I'll start with, we had confusion about the statement that assessment of student mastery will happen in real time, allowing students to accelerate at a personalized pace, and what that really means. There are a couple different examples of what it could mean, which means it's not clear enough. What does that mean? And I guess you don't have to answer that now, but whatever that means. On page 29, where it talks about the growth assessments, it says, I believe it says they take the test based on content they haven't learned yet. I just wonder how accurate that is, because the first year it was old content, then it was content they didn't learn, and now it's previous content again. So I don't know if that needs to be wordsmithed, because it's changed each year. And then I'll say, I mentioned this, and I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but it says that Virginia's assessment system has fallen behind the rest of the nation. And my immediate thought was, really, behind everybody? We're that terrible? And is it really our assessment? Is it our expectations? Is it our standards? I mean, really, behind everyone in the nation, our assessments is what I thought are that terrible. And I don't think that's true. If the assessment system encompasses the standards and the expectations and the assessment, or is it just the standards and expectations? Is the assessment assessing what it's supposed to? I just think that's a pretty hefty statement to make. And maybe it could be wordsmithed a little differently. Because I don't think our assessments themselves are worse than everyone else in the nation.
Nor is there like a single yardstick with which to measure that. So
Right.
We can wordsmith that a bit.
And then if the group has anything else.
Well, I'm going to come back around to group one. So Susan, if you want to share out, and then we'll go to the last group.
Sure, thanks. On the positive side, I think we're resonating with what other groups have said about acknowledging the severe limits of these BGA reports, the lack of actionable data, wanting to minimize the testing footprint, and we like the graph showing the over testing. We did have quite a bit of a discussion on this tension on timing related to recommendations on pacing guides, and that, you know, when testing windows, when the test is given at a certain time, it can be, you know, helpful in your testing framework, but there was discussion on, in the recommendations, would we want assessments to be better aligned to student learning outcomes, meaning can we meet students where they are in this age and stage sort of growth framework. So we just wanted to acknowledge that there are tensions that are showing up in these different areas that were showing up here. On the edits piece, we really wanted to strengthen the innovation recommendations for supporting competency-based assessments and performance assessments, providing more flexibility for innovation and interdisciplinary approaches in particular, wanting to provide multiple ways for students to demonstrate what they know in the profile of a graduate, supporting innovation through better assessment literacy and training for educators, so that we can enable different expressions of learning and durable skills. So I think there's some other comments in there, but that kind of captures the big idea on, can we focus on using research on the science of learning for how kids learn best and design principles for innovative assessment there, and really help invest in our educators to be able to do performance assessments.
Thanks, Susan. And then we have Katie's group.
Yeah, and it's going to be me this time. A lot of what we talked about has already been said. I would comment to Susan's observation that the graph on 29 just shows over testing. A piece of what I heard from school divisions was they were using those other tests because those were tests that gave them information they could use and were tied to things their teachers understood. Whereas the VGA, I gotta say, maybe one of the things in Virginia that was pretty universally regarded as just maybe a really good idea, but it just didn't do what it was intended to do. And my question, and I'm not a testing expert, so is it because Virginia has insisted we can only have one assessment when it's growth, or is it that the particular testing instrument was not very good? And I don't know that answer, and we're probably not going to solve that today, but I think it's probably a conversation worth having. But what is pretty universally agreed on is that whatever it is, it ain't working very well right now. And so school divisions that I talk to have said we're sticking with what we know because it works for us. Now then, the only other cautionary tale that we would raise, and it is on page 32, and it is bullet number 5, and it is sort of, just set out as a little bullet in a list, which is use a high stakes final for students that is a proportion of their grade. Now, that may be a very good idea, but can I just say that is like, boy, did you bury the lead, and boy, would that create a shitstorm in Virginia. And if you go that way, you can't bury it on page 32, and you better do a lot more listening to parents, students, and teachers before you roll it out, because it is going to be just an unholy mess. So that's from us.
Great. Thank you. Let's shift to our last rotation. And this rotation is actually content that we didn't cover in any of our previous meetings. So this is getting at what is the timeline to make this real? What is it going to look like for implementation? What funding is needed? And what legislative changes might be needed? I think we're a little short on time, Julia, so we'll probably stick to a similar timeline, but you may need a little more time to read, and we'll adjust as we go. So we will jump into our small group starting on page 33. Okay, I think we have everyone back. This was our last small group rotation on the report, and your feedback so far has been so helpful and constructive, and will make this report even better and clearer and more powerful for students. So let's start with Shelley and Sarah's group this time.
I don't mind starting if someone else will pick up maybe in some of the topics I don't cover. Thank you. I see heads nodding yes. I do on the correction side, I think there needs to be a little clarification around recovery. The statute talks about students get remediation and then retake a test. And that happens for one small group of kids, but for the rest of the majority of students, that it's actually the next test they take that they're going to take anyway that becomes the recovery test. So I think maybe the language there is confusing and might need to be clarified. The statute is really what's confusing, which makes it look like everyone takes an additional test, but that's not really the case. And I'm sure others can help clarify that for you. And then let's see, we talked about maybe instead of creating a test bank from scratch, maybe purchasing some things. There's a lot out there already. So maybe some money can be saved by purchasing good work that's already there and then supplement with the other things that we need. Concern about the extra money, where would it come from, and will divisions suffer loss of funds if additional monies need to go to this arena? And there's a concern, you know, of course, any money loss at the school division. And then we were ended talking about expedited retakes. It would, so some folks are not going to be happy if we eliminate expedited retakes in 3 through 8. And some will. It certainly would be an easier conversation if we hadn't already had it. And to recommend to take it away is going to cause some heartburn for people. So we were just kind of talking through maybe a whole group conversation about, is that really what we're recommending and what does that mean? And I don't know, that's where we ended our conversation and couldn't finish. So if anyone in the group wants to elaborate on any of that, feel free.
Yeah, Tracy, I definitely think you covered it. One thought that came to mind as you were going along, and the financial question was my question when and it's saying, hey, we allocate 1% roughly of the budget to the assessment creation. And I think we know with anything, is this just going to be an additional money when they're saying additional appropriation is needed? And I think something like that, I don't know if we want to spell that out when we start thinking about the implementation, but I think that's going to be some of the concern for school divisions. And with the other comment about maybe looking at other test banks that have been created and seeing how we could revise, maybe that could lessen some of that fiscal impact or fiscal blow, but just another piece to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just layer on. I mean, I know I was confused at the difference between a recovery test and a retake. And recovery is kind of a confusing word if it's a new test. I guess you recovered last year's lack if you can pass the next year's test. I don't know, but yeah, and then just discussing the pros and cons of maybe eliminating this expedite retake in grades 3 through 8. Just like, is the concern that they aren't learning it if they can turn right back around and retake it? Or I don't know, I feel like there's a concern here that maybe isn't articulated that I'm trying to, you know,
I think part of the concern is having a lot of constructed responses and the time it takes to score those and then have time for an expedite before the end of the school year. So you'll see on the Jamboard when you look at it, I made a comment. I think some people are not going to be happy with it, but I also made a comment to give teachers more time for instruction. I'm on the fence about it and would, you know, it's a touchy topic, I think.
Yeah, this came up in group 1 as well. And I can give the cliff notes because we ran out of time and everyone else has taken a rotation. But similarly raised the question of Tracy, exactly what you said. Some people will like this, some people will hate it. And I think that's interesting. There was also folks like the tie into accountability and naming that is a critical part of what has to be solved when updating the assessment. I just want to make sure I'm not missing. I want to make sure there's funding for educator capacity support. Some things that we wanted to make sure evolved is there's some legislation we want to make sure if it needs to be added that it gets added, so we're going to follow up on that. Opportunities again to connect assessment accountability, but also connecting to the profile of a graduate and mapping that backwards. I'm sure I missed things from my group, so they should feel free to jump in. All right, I will shift to group 2, which is Katie's group, though I think there's Katie.
We also had discussion on the elimination of the expedited retake. I think maybe we need to, or we could possibly put in the wording of reviewing that process and come up with a revamp of an expedited retake, or the opportunity for a student to try again, and maybe restructure it that here's where the window is, and then they can retest at a later time, or whatever it may be, to get that remediation in prior. Right now in grades 3 through 8, we do need parent permission in order to administer that test. So parents have control over whether that student takes the test or not. It's nothing that is required. It's nothing that is forced on by the school divisions. We provide the opportunity, and if a parent doesn't want it, then we don't administer it. If the parent wants it, then we provide that opportunity. I think parents would like to have that control, and if we eliminate it, I think there will be parents that would want that opportunity. So I don't agree with the elimination piece, but I do agree with that maybe we need to look at, see if there's a way that we can restructure the expedited opportunities for grades 3 through 8. Chris mentioned something about the open-ended test items. I can't remember what she said. Chris,
So
you may want to chime in on that.
I was talking with the superintendent who said that if she sat in yet another meeting where people said the only thing they wanted to talk about with artificial intelligence was that students were going to cheat, she was going to poke her eyes out. And that could we talk about instead, shift the conversation? Are there ways that new technologies like AI could make it possible to ask more in-depth questions that required more of students? And you would still have, of course, human beings looking at it at some point, but could that, would that, first of all, I think she would be more likely to go to another conference, but would it open up a more well-rounded conversation about AI? Because our kids gonna cheat, but like, we don't need to continue to just say that all the time. So that was one thing. I think the other thing that we really felt strongly about was the notion that you cannot develop high quality assessments on the cheap. And I think this report does lay that out pretty clearly. Just look, this is what the state spent, this is what the state spent. So I think that's it, Wendy, right?
Okay, Jamie's group. I'm gonna call on you guys, and then you kind of get, I won't let you have the last word. We'll leave some additional time if folks have other things to add.
Jamie, you want to kick us off?
man, I was trying to wait out Matt. So we had a lot of the same conversations. A large part of our conversations revolved around expedited retakes. And I'm just going to Matt and I both do not think we should eliminate those. And I think the way the language is written kind of gives the false impression that we're making kids take extra tests and it's all these additional things. Well, first of all, a kid has to qualify to take an expedited retake by hitting a certain minimum score. And then their parent, especially in K through or 3 through 8, the parent has to opt them in to take the opportunity. And we have to look at what is our goal of our assessment system? Is it truly to measure what kids know, understand, and can do? Then giving them one other opportunity to do that is not a bad thing. And the fact that if a parent doesn't want that, they can opt their kid out of that. That's the perfect balance of both sides. So that was kind of where I was on that, and Matt as well. I think, Matt, you can jump in if you think that I misrepresented you. We also talked about, the same thing on the expedited retake is one test on one day. And I think I said this previously, but I've seen a kid go from a 375 to a 600 because somebody was talking to his girlfriend the first day he took the test. So if you know enough to get a 375 or whatever the minimum metric is, I think being able to let that kid show what he have the opportunity if their parents in agreement is a positive. And then I'll go back to somebody said something about profile of a graduate, and I feel like I beat this horn all the time, but I really do think we have to be careful not to miss an opportunity here. That if we're saying these are the aspirations and things we want our kids to be able to do, that our assessment system is designed to measure whether that's really happening or not. And at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, in my opinion, the final assessment on the ground level drives what the classroom instruction looks like in the classroom. So I saw that performance tasks were mentioned one time and something about Louisiana throughout the whole document. So I think we need to have a balanced assessment system. My personal belief is too much of anything is not good, right? My mom always said that if you're doing one thing all the time, that's probably not good. So finding some balance in there to make sure that we truly are assessing whatever we really want is important, and I don't want to miss that opportunity. And there are organizations across the state that are already working on developing these high quality systems. So it's not like it would cost a ton of money.
And to piggyback on what Jamie was saying about the expedited retakes, I've seen numerous examples of kids who were woefully behind at the beginning of the year. I mean, based on their previous year's scores, and teachers worked very diligently day in and day out with that kid and got them very, very close. And then they gave them the test and they just barely failed. And then they took the SDBQ data and continued to work with that kid. And the kid was then able to demonstrate proficiency based on that extra work. So, if timing is an issue at the end of the year, what better time than to invest in our summer programs? We do all this remediation in summer programs. Could we also do expedites during that time frame? That provides a lot more meaningful time that we could work with kids. So in lieu of getting rid of that, I would recommend that we could possibly move it to summer rather than at the end of the year. The other things is, I read in there, I think I read it correctly, that the recommendation was to eliminate the 3-year growth assessments. And if that's the case, it's like Christmas today. So I really do appreciate that. And then the last thing about the timing of the new standards, this is certainly an accelerated implementation schedule. And I think our folks can deal with that. The problem that I'm having is just not knowing when all the ancillary materials are going to be available. Just having the standards themselves isn't sufficient for us to plan accordingly for the new math implementation next year. And, if we knew that we were going to be getting curriculum frameworks or that curriculum framework type information in a more timely manner so that we can hit the ground running like pretty quick to get everything ready for next year, that would help a lot.
Alan, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, expedited retakes took 3 General Assembly sessions to get that through for grades 3 through 8. It was earned by multiple organizations, and there's also a child-centered reason for it. I was an elementary principal at the time they came online, and my youngest son ended up being one of the first eligible for that. And it was profoundly powerful for him, and has been for many children since. Whereas instead of spending the entire summer thinking that he was a failure, having that second opportunity helped him to enjoy his summer, because the truth was the day he took the test, he was enduring a different hardship. So expedited retakes, there's a student-centered reason for them as well.
I really appreciate this discussion. And I think some of the nuanced language that I heard you guys share about, and the reason this is coming up, right, as I think Tracy articulated well, is ensuring that expedited retesting policy doesn't become a barrier to our vision around timeliness and maximizing learning time. And I heard you all articulate a number of ways that that could happen, including shifting retesting to the summer, or being more flexible about when and how retesting happens, leveraging AI so that test results can be returned faster. Generally, all of these make a lot of sense, and I appreciate this discussion. It's really thoughtful and interesting to me. I am conscious of our time, so we're gonna and I would rather get all of your feedback on the report and make sure we really understand what changes we should be making to finalize the report. So the activity I mentioned at the beginning, we were going to do some discussion around what supports educators and families and students will need. And to some extent, Matt, this gets at the comment you were just making about the timeline for all of the ancillary supports and how important it is that that those things, it's not just that they happen, but they happen on a timeline that actually allows educators to adjust, to learn, to understand the new standards, understand the new assessment before they're sort of held accountable for what happens on those tests. So what we're going to do is incorporate those questions into the exit ticket. So we are giving you a little bit of extra homework. The other thing I want to reemphasize is the exit ticket includes, if there are additional thoughts that as you are listening to people talk, if you are like, oh man, I wish I had told them to change X, Y, and Z about the report, please feel free to share that there, or you still have access to the Jamboards. You're welcome to add that there. Julia, why don't we jump back into the deck? Because I realize I'm like trying to make sure I remember all of the next steps, but they are all actually in our deck. So I will ask, I think, when you get that exit ticket, and we can also put it in the chat, if you even have a few minutes after this meeting, I know it's already been a long meeting, but to go ahead and fill it out while all the content is fresh, that will allow us to sort of more quickly get all of the feedback and turn it around. What you can expect is in the next month, we will send you a copy of the final report. We may also reach out to you individually to follow up on some of the feedback we heard today, just to make sure that we've reflected it accurately in the report. So appreciate you in advance being willing to continue to provide your feedback. We want to make sure that the report that gets published and the recommendations that go to the legislature reflect truly everything that we have heard this group say. Of course, there are things that like one person might feel strongly about and someone else feels strongly in the opposite direction. And we'll do our best to reflect that as well, and thread the needle and make sure that the report reflects those meaty discussions we've had. Ultimately, the Virginia team will publish that report, and their big next step here is beginning the process to select and procure a new assessment system, including all the things that go with that, building all the supports and resources that educators will need to pull that off. Julie and Jamie, before I hand it over to, I believe, Superintendent Coons is going to close us out, I want to make sure there's nothing I forgot that I needed to cover with this group. Okay. Thank you, Julie and Jamie, for keeping me on task always, and forever, and really making this group what it is, producing all the materials, keeping you guys organized. So appreciate them. Dr. Coons, I will hand it over to you to close us out.
Yeah, I really want to thank Watershed. You guys have done a Herculean effort of getting us from where we started to now and coordinating us, keeping us on track, doing all the hard work between the conversations to the draft report, making sure that you have these content areas that you have the opportunity to weigh in, because their work has allowed all of the conversations today, all of the comments will now be taken back and reshape that document again. That is not a small effort, and obviously, our agency has been a little busy in the past week. So the fact that they have really pushed on this and been able to continue to carry this would not have been possible for the Department of Education. So want to really shout out Watershed and the team for keeping us going and keeping us moving the work forward, because this is critical and essential. I will speak for the board for a minute, but the board members have talked about how important the 585 task force and the assessment report is essential to talking about accountability and accreditation, because we can't do one without the other. And I think, Dr. Siebert, you talked at the last board meeting about the work of this group and how important it is to continue moving this work at the same time the board is considering revisions to accountability and accreditation. So thrilled that this is able to move forward, that we're able to release this very quickly. Y'all thank Dr. Siebert in advance, because I think he's been voluntold by his peers on the board that he's going to share this information with the board next week. So very appreciative. There are next steps, though. Very appreciative of the conversations today, very appreciative of where we are and the level of input from all of you to help us really think through intentionally what's important to Virginians, what's important in your experiences, what is necessary, what you have fought really hard for, such as those retakes, and what we need to consider in the way in which it moves forward, because I think that is the layer of importance of this task force. Next steps. And Jamie, I'm also going to have to look at my notes to make sure I don't mess them up. And Jill, I appreciate your help there. So I want to make sure that we think about that survey that Jill just talked about, because it is super important that we get that information and get that additional homework in that. I want to give you an opportunity of a preview what will come. There will be a final report that is put together. The VDOE will publish that final report. In addition to that report, Virginia will start to do a RFP process. That is not a short process for an assessment, and for the amount of money that we, as you mentioned earlier, need to put a quality assessment program together. And that asks for additional funds for that assessment will be part of that RFP process, because we want to make sure, as we're thinking about an RFP for assessment, we are putting the things that you feel are important into that RFP and making sure that those things and those recommendations are part of a cost included in that RFP. So that will be part of that process as well. And really want to appreciate so many of you. These are not short meetings. These are good, meaty conversations that get to the depth that will really change opportunities for children in the Commonwealth. And that service that you have provided, I think, will make a huge difference as we continue to move forward. So I've enjoyed being a part of most of this task force work and hearing the diverse conversations and the important conversations that we've had. And just want to thank each of you for everything you did through this group and everything you do for kids every day. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Coons. I realize Julia is working to add those questions for the activity we missed to the exit ticket. So she'll send it out, or Jamie, one of the two, will send it out ASAP in a minute here. Alan, I saw your note in the comment, and I will, I think, I know some people probably have a hard stop at 1:30, but welcome additional discussion here and appreciate being willing to have it. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, I thought Alan said we all gonna stick around, and then he bounced.
I know. I wonder if Superintendent Coons's wrap up provided some of the information he was looking to talk about because he has left. So
Okay.
okay.
Well,
But-
anyway, it was great, and congratulations to you guys for really running an open and inclusive process that I think came up with a very solid end product. So good job.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. We appreciate both of you and all of the time and effort you've put into this. And we look forward to your survey feedback as a final plug to get your thoughts.
Great.
I was just gonna say, thanks for listening to my rants.
Of course, always.
All right, bye.